everyone, welcome to Totally Awesome History News, where we're going to look at historical and history-related topics that have made the news. If someone were to say the word medieval, what would you think of? What about Middle Ages? Would it be different? It turns out that for most people, it would be. At least those people who don't have a formal training in history. That's one of the findings in a new book out by Dr. Paul Sturtevant, a medievalist who works at the Smithsonian Institute, which was reviewed on Philly.com. I'll post the link down in the description. In his book, The Middle Ages in Popular Imagination, Memory, Film, and Medievalism, Sturtevant wanted to learn how the public understanding of the Middle Ages is shaped by big-budget films. He did this by conducting 4 focus groups with British adults who had no formal training in history. In them, he used word association games with words like medieval and Middle Ages, and held viewings and discussions of Beowulf, Kingdom of Heaven, and Return of the King. While scholars use the terms Middle Ages and medieval relatively interchangeably, what he found was that the majority of the participants didn't. They identified the term Middle Ages with an actual period in history, but they associated the term medieval with a setting from fantasy and legend. The distinction also seems to have applied to the films. Any film which is perceived to be medieval by its viewers has the potential to contribute to the public understanding of the Middle Ages. What's more, Sturtevant found that watching any of the movies in isolation didn't really lead to any significant learning, but the more movies that they watched, the more of an appreciation the participants did gain for the period. For example, they gained an appreciation of medieval sea travel, shattering their unconscious perspective that the medieval world was landlocked. The films also discouraged the notion that the Middle Ages were predominantly English despite the film's accents. They also recognized the use of trebuchets from film to film as a medieval icon. On the other hand, the films did a greater disservice to history and historical people when it came to such things as religion. The participants discussed medieval religion with disdain, often envisioning illiterate people universally believing whatever came from a maniacal Catholic Church, even when the film conflicted with that notion. Sturtevant concluded that if we separate ourselves from our historical forebears by this metric, seeing them as other or even lesser for their religious beliefs, there is little stopping us from doing the same to those of other religions. Lastly, in his book, Sturtevant includes a detailed outline for anyone on how to recreate the experiment for any historical period. I think it's definitely true that in the popular imagination and how most people think of history, there is a definite bias creep that comes from what we see in movies, television, and popular culture in general. I know that even for me, when I think of the medieval period or the Middle Ages, the first stop that my mind goes to is images from movies and television, and I have had historical training. One TV show that immediately springs to my mind is history's Vikings. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the show. And to be honest, I'm still looking for my Lagertha. But Vikings does tend to portray medieval Norse people as being generally on the dirty side, as well as being overly fond of dark-colored Mad Max-style outfits. But there is strong evidence that they were rather hygienic and purveyors of high fashion, preferring colorful clothes with patterns and even ribbons. They even went so far as to use tweezers and nail cleaners. And there's even an English source that decries the Viking success with women as being attributable to the fact that they bathed on Saturdays, combed their hair, and were fashionably dressed. But all that said, they do get a lot right, including the eyeliner. And the show is just totally awesome. But my point is that now, when many people think of the Viking Age, they're going to be thinking of Ragnar and Sons in their mind. Of course, when you think about it, the present and popular culture has really always influenced the way that people in the present have viewed the past. Even the idea of Vikings with horns on their helmets came as a result of popular culture in the 19th century, in particular, Wagner's Nibelungring opera cycle. Another thing that I found interesting, though hardly surprising from the results of Sturtevant's study, were the attitudes that the participants held toward medieval religion. And I tend to think that the assessments that they had of it were largely unfair and overly simplistic. It's actually rather presumptuous of us as moderns looking back into the medieval period to look back and judge our ancestors as really just being stupid, illiterate peasants under the thumb of a maniacal and monolithic Catholic Church with nothing but power, domination, and greed on its mind. And in many ways, that overly simplistic understanding and explanation really says more about us and the things that we hold as important than it does about them. Lastly, I think this would be really cool to run this experiment for other periods. For example, the Roman period. When we think back to then, would we automatically just immediately think of centurions or emperors or gladiators? Would we romanticize the past, the Roman past, for example? It's always fun to take a step back and try to see where our perceptions and our beliefs about things come from, and to examine if they do indeed match reality. So here's some questions for you. How much of an influence do you think movies, television, and popular culture has on our perceptions of history of the past? Can you think of any really cool examples that you know of and maybe that you like? Are there any eras or periods that you think a study like this would be really useful in looking at? Please leave your comments down below. I look forward to reading them. And if you actually have read this book, please definitely comment. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Hey guys, I really hope you like this. And if you did, please like, share, and subscribe so that I can bring you more.